Ferrari,
We
the
should.
SF24, because this is a car that has a lot resting on its shoulders this season. They've not only do they need to build on what they did last year, but they have to build a car that for me certainly it's important because that essentially is the car that Lewis Hamilton's going to be driving next season. Um,
Completely unbiased now. Come on, let's go.
so yeah. Make it good, Ferrari. That's all I'm going to say. Um,
SF24. Make it good for SF25, right? We should look
um,
at you.
but okay. So let's have a little look at the Ferrari. So
Do
what were
that.
their aims? Okay. So what do they need to do? All
Mm-hmm.
right. They first of all needed better drivability. So
Mm-hmm.
Charles and Carlos both talked about the fact that actually the car was always on a bit of a knife edge,
Right.
and you were always on the edge of adhesion, and that's at least partly why Charles felt like he was throwing the car off the road in certain races. Miami is the one that really springs to mind last season, and yes, the car was fast, but it was difficult, um, and I think one of the things that they need to be able to do is take the car a step back, try and maintain the pace, but not make it quite so difficult to drive. The second big thing for me, like the big elephant in the room, is Ferrari were obviously amazing at one lap pace, but they seem to lose that in the races. And there needs to be a way for them to be able to maintain at least some semblance of their qualifying pace in the races. And although they seem to be getting that towards the end of the season, certainly Japan, Abu Dhabi, Vegas was a little bit of an outlier because I think the track surface was so ungrippy that there was no tire wear there anyway. So that always sort of played to their traits. But you could kind of see that the trend was that they were starting to understand that towards the end of the season. So that is something that they need to build on. And I think we're going to talk about how what one of their decisions, at least, I think is sort of plays to that. But you had a look at the car, you had a look at the livery. What did you think?
Yeah, I loved it. It looked great. Shout out to McDonald's, by the way, for adding a little bit of color there. But I think the biggest thing for me is what you just talked about, which is drivability being less peaky, right? Like I think that Ferrari have had this sort of like let's go all in on the concept, right? And it's either been epically great on Saturdays and then epically bad on Sundays, right? And just to kind of bring that down a little bit. And I wouldn't mind seeing a string of consistent, podium places, maybe even, just outside of the podium places if they are going to be able to build on that car. I think you hit the nail on the head with sort of the correlation between wind tunnel and track. I mean, it was really disappointing, disheartening to hear what the drivers were saying for most of the first half of the season, which is we don't know. We don't know what's going on. Like we have no way of knowing that when we do X, then this happens, and we do Y, then something else happens. And it seems like, it feels like, and I would add a lot of great caution, as I've told my fellow Ferrari, fellow Tifosi brethren, that you take all of these with a pinch of salt, but it does feel like they have put together a car that does aim to be more drivable. And I think that by itself can pay some dividends and at least help them secure a form second place, if not, consistently compete with Max and Red Bull. So yeah,
Yeah,
go ahead.
I mean, their trajectory at the end of last season seemed to suggest that they'd got that, and I think that plays into what
Mhm,
their car looks like.
mhm,
So just looking at the car and reading what some of the analyses of this car have been, I feel like Ferrari are in a unique position
mhm,
in that they've been very conservative with the way that they've progressed their car. Um, And I think specifically, like the case in point is their rear suspension,
mhm,
right? Which I'm going to come to in a second. But they've moved forward very conservatively, and some of the trends that other teams have now moved towards are what Ferrari have refused to go towards, and they're still sticking with what they have. So they're in a unique position of being very conservative in their own in their own car development, but it's left them in a radical position of being outliers in certain areas. So the rear suspension is a case in point. So they've got what's known as a pushrod front suspension and a pullrod rear suspension, and a lot of the other teams have moved to a pushrod rear suspension. And I'm sure everyone's heard these terms a lot, and over the course of launch season. But I just wanted to just clarify what I think my understanding of what these terms mean. So, quick crash course in Formula One suspension. So, Formula One cars are suspended using a double wishbone system. What's a double wishbone? Here it is. This is a plan view of the Ferrari F14. I think this is the 2014 car, and you can see the front suspension, and highlighted in yellow is the wishbone. It looks literally like the wishbone from your Christmas turkey. You've got two of those, one at the top, one at the bottom, and sitting in the middle of those two, highlighted in magenta, is the track rod, and the track rod is what pushes and pulls and defines whether your car has a pull rod or a push rod suspension. So then if we look at the car head on, you can see that in this diagram, the black lines represent the wishbones, and the red line and the blue line represent the track rod. And on the left-hand side is a pull rod suspension, and on the right is a push rod suspension. And what you can see here is that the track rod connects to a rocker, and the rocker connects to a damper. So when the car goes over a bump, or it brakes or it accelerates, the suspension gets pushed down. And when it gets pushed down, the track rod either pulls or it pushes on that rocker, and that rocker then attaches to the damper, which then keeps the car as stable as possible. In terms of what that means for a push rod or pull rod, the pull rod allows the rocker to be at the base of the car. Okay, so the weight distribution can be placed lower, so you have a lower center of gravity. That's the main advantage of doing a pull rod suspension. But the push rod suspension gives you more space at the bottom of the car to either make the car smaller or place something else there. And shout out to Will Davies who on Twitter is at not only aha track. That's NOTONLYAHA track on Twitter, and the Side Podcast for allowing us to use their diagram for this. I think this is the clearest explanation of how a pull rod and push rod suspension works, and we've added a link in the description below to the website in this diagram, so you can have a look at it. It's brilliant, so definitely have a look at that. And just how does that actually relate to what Ferrari have done? So Ferrari have kept a pull rod suspension, and that's despite everybody else moving towards a push rod rear suspension. And we'll come to why that's been done in other cars later. But for Ferrari, it probably makes sense. Ferrari started to understand their rear tyre wear over the course of the second half of the season, and that was in conjunction with their pull rod suspension. So keeping that in play, keeping what they understand, makes sense. And I think that's probably why they've done it, and why they've stayed conservative in terms of the other things that they've done in their car as well. They want to keep the gains that they've made. Making a radical change to a completely different rear suspension risks losing that. So I think that's why they've left it as it is. In terms of the other things on the car, you could see that air of conservatism was evident elsewhere too. So the side pod system, although they've got this overbite that they've taken from the Red Bull of last season, they've still got quite a big inlet, and that maybe suggests that their cooling because that's what the side pot inlet is there for, is to feed cooling
Yep.
air to the radiator and the turbo intercooler, all of those things. Because unlike a road car, they can't use moving cooling parts. It's not allowed. So all of their cooling is done by what is driven through the car, the air that's driven through the car at pace. So they need that. That's why they have big inlets, big outlets to vent that air further down the car. And their inlet was quite big, and that suggests that their cooling systems inside the car maybe aren't quite as robust as what other teams have got. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops over the course of the season. And it may be that what we see now in terms of that inlet and the cooling further down the car isn't what we're going to see further down the season. But at present, it looks quite conservative. So in summary, I think Ferrari have got quite a conservative development, especially in terms of their suspension layout. I think there are good reasons for why they've done that, but it'd be interesting to see how that develops and how their performance develops with that over the course of the season.
Yeah, I think you did such a great job of summarizing the technical aspects of it, but I think it all sort of boils down to having a more stable platform, right? And that seems to be at the core of all of their issues from last year and maybe even the year before. So going for that stability, that aero sort of opportunity, I think it seems like it does also kind of feel like they're attempting to get something in line for 25 and beyond as well. So this might be a continuation of that experimental phase as well. So yeah, that's great. No, that's a really good breakdown of the Ferrari.